This coming Saturday, June the 20th, my wife, Ginger, and I, we would have celebrated our 56th wedding anniversary. We believed that we would grow old together. We believed that we would walk through every season of life together, side by side, until the very day that we died. But that date and that time for us to do that, it was never meant to happen. And about 5 years ago, Ginger changed addresses and she relocated to heaven. So now we have a long distance relationship. So although she is no longer with me, she wasn't with me to the end, I was able to be with her. I was able to be with her through every sickness, every hospital stay, every struggle, until the day she died. And losing her changed me drastically. And I was a wreck. And I felt like I was a ship without a rudder. And I didn't know it at that time if or when I would ever be able to return as a pastor of a church again. I just couldn't see a date and a time that I was going to be able to do that. It was just too emotional. But then God visited me in the middle of the night, as he often does, and he showed me that all of the pain that I was feeling in my heart, that pain of not knowing the date and the time, it could be a blessing for others to know that and to realize that. I will never forget our last night together. Ginger was sleeping in a hospital bed in our living room, and I was trying to stay awake so that I could be there in case she needed me. And I checked on her around midnight, and then I checked on her again around 3:30 in the morning, and she appeared to be okay. And then when I awoke around 7:30, she had passed away. She had passed away peacefully in her sleep. And I was devastated. I was in shock. Because just days earlier, the doctors had told me that she probably had about another week to live. So I thought that I had a week to tell her everything that I wanted to tell her. I didn't know I only had hours. And since then, I've recounted the memories and thoughts in my mind. They've replayed over and over again. I first started dating Ginger when she was about 18 years old. Not long after that, she developed juvenile diabetes. And up until then, she was healthy. Neither one of us knew that there would be a date and a time when her physical condition would change so radically. She had a sister who was a diabetic. She had a brother who was a diabetic who had died earlier because of the diabetes. So fear began to creep into her heart. And we were getting very serious about each other. So she worried that I might change my mind about marrying her. But I told her that I loved her in sickness and in health, in better and for worse, until death do us part. Little did I know. A year later, we were married. And I can assure you, I never saw a date and a time I would marry someone so beautiful who loved me. About 10 years later, we were celebrating New Year's Eve at the Virginia Beach oceanfront. Ginger was born on January 1st, so she was a New Year's baby. So we would often go out, and not only would we celebrate New Year's, we would celebrate her birthday. So we reserved a hotel room along the boardwalk. We danced the night away, and the next morning, we had breakfast at the restaurant in the hotel. And then we went back to our hotel room to rest. And an hour later, I woke up and I found that she was lying next to me, and she was drenched in sweat. Her body was limp. She was lifeless. Her eyes were glazed over. And she was in a severe diabetic coma. And I ran out of the room. I was looking for a Coke machine because I knew if I could get her to sip a little bit of Coke, it would raise her blood sugar levels and it would slowly bring her out of this reaction. But I couldn't find one. I searched for a phone so I could call 911. And this was before cell phones. I couldn't find a phone either. So I ran out into the parking lot and I was looking up and down Atlantic Avenue, trying and hoping that I could find the phone, but I couldn't see a phone anywhere. So I ran back into the hotel lobby and I ran up to the receptionist and I asked her to please call 911. And the EMTs were in our room in just minutes. And they began administering glucose to Ginger, and they brought her out of her diabetic coma. And then they rushed her to Virginia Beach General Hospital. Now that was the first time in our marriage that I thought I was going to lose her. But there were going to be many, many other times. So as I followed the ambulance to the hospital, grief began to overwhelm me. And I thought that this was going to be the date and the time. But God had other plans. The doctors diagnosed her as being a brittle diabetic. That means that her blood sugar levels could swing from high to low in just seconds. And that kind of uncontrollable blood sugars later attacked her eyes, and she developed diabetic retinopathy, which involves the blood vessels bursting in the back of your eyes, causing her retina to bleed. And if it's not properly taken care of, a person could go blind very quickly. So Ginger had laser treatments on both of her eyes, which caused scars to form on her retina, and that would affect her vision for the rest of her life. And her diabetes eventually caused her kidneys to fail completely. She was only in her 40s. We began doing dialysis treatments 3 times a week up in her bedroom. But dialysis is only a short-term solution. It can prolong life for just a few years. It's not forever. Eventually, she was placed on the transplant waiting list for both a kidney and a pancreas. And that was experimental surgery at this time. No one had ever done a combined pancreas and kidney transplant, at least on the East Coast. And only God knew the date and the time that a donor would become available. Only God knew whose life would be a miracle for hers. Some poor soul would have to die for her to live. Well, one day, the call finally came. We had 4 hours to leave our jobs, to say goodbye, to drive to Richmond, to check into MCV Medical Hospital, undergo one last kidney dialysis and prepare for surgery. 4 hours. It takes 2 hours to get to Richmond. Plus, we had no idea when we would be ever able to come back from Richmond. We did not know how long she would have to stay there. So that night, as I was alone in the waiting room while the operation stretched on and on, hour after hour after hour through the night, I was just praying. At one time, the nurse finally came into the waiting room and she told me that the pancreas had been damaged during the harvesting. And the damage was creating problems for the surgeon who was desperately trying to attempt to transplant this organ into Ginger's body. It just wasn't being received very well. And the enemy whispered in my mind, in my ear, she's not going to make it this time. She's not going to survive this operation. But once again, it was not the date, the time for her to meet her bridegroom. It was a miracle that she lived through the operation. But only God knew the date and the time that a young boy would become the donor that would save her life. He would lose his, but he would save hers, and she lived an additional 25 years. And that was a miracle in itself. We had another terrifying moment at the River Road Church. Ginger became critically ill during one of the services, and her blood pressure crashed. And after the service, the church had planned to do some baptisms in the bay off of Shore Drive. And I encouraged everyone to go home and that I would take Ginger. I encouraged everyone to go to do these baptisms and that I would take Ginger home. I was only a block away. When I got her home, she couldn't stand up. She couldn't get out of the car. So I called 911. And they put me on hold. When my phone call finally got through, and when the EMTs arrived, they checked her vital signs immediately. And one of the EMTs screamed out, "Cardiac arrest." She had no pulse. She had no heartbeat. They physically threw Ginger's body into the back of the ambulance. But before administering CPR, they asked me, does she have a DNR, which is a do not resuscitate? And I said no. So moments later, her heart began beating again, and she was breathing again. So once again, this was not the date and the time for her to meet her bridegroom. Now, many of you know Shaz. Shaz visited her while she was in the hospital. And Ginger told Shaz, "I guess heaven isn't ready for me yet." But the months that followed, they were not good months for her. She continued to be sick. She was limited to what she could do. And in December of 2020, she was rushed to the ER again. She had sepsis. And her veins had dehydrated. The veins were so dehydrated that the nurses could not insert a needle in order to run an IV to draw blood. They weren't able to pump saline that was desperately needed to offset the dehydration. They weren't able to get that needle in there for the medications that were needed to fight the bacteria and the infection that was causing all the pain and all the sufferings and the doctors were frantic, and they were scared, which made me scared. And they made it clear that she was not going to make it if they couldn't get a needle into her veins. Well, I want you to know that a lot of prayer warriors, in this area prevented that night from being the date and the time. She was back in the hospital twice that same September. Her kidneys were infected. She continued to be dehydrated, and somehow, in the previous stay in the hospital, she had caught pneumonia and COVID. Now, I haven't mentioned this earlier, but Ginger hated hospitals. She hated being in the hospital, and she wanted to come home. And she told me to go out and buy her a wheelchair while we were in the waiting room. She said, if you can get me a wheelchair, I would be able to do everything that I need to do at home. I don't have to be in the hospital. Get me a wheelchair. So I went out and bought her a wheelchair. But they wouldn't let her leave. They kept her through January. And no visitors were allowed to visit because of COVID restrictions. And we went through 4 weeks where she was too weak to call me, and 4 weeks of not receiving any phone calls from the doctor telling me what her condition is, giving me updates, a little bit of encouragement. No phone calls. And then finally I got a phone call. The doctors told me there was nothing left they could do. Her kidneys had worsened. They continued to worsen, and she was quickly moving into stage 5 kidney failure. Complete shutdown of our kidneys. And they told me that she was too old to be placed back on the transplant waiting list. And they told me she was too weak to undergo dialysis. So hospice arrangements were made to bring her home. That was a Friday. They didn't get her home till Sunday evening. When she came home, she was in a lot of pain. But when she awoke Monday morning, she was an entirely different person. She was alive, she was feeling great because she was home. She was full of life. She seemed to have the whole world in her hands again. Typical Ginger. And for a moment there, I thought that the doctors were wrong. She spent most of the day that Monday on the telephone, calling her brothers and her sisters long distance, speaking with them, speaking to her nieces or nephews. Friends came by to visit her. And then Tuesday came, and she passed away in her sleep. She made her transition. She made her transition to heaven. And only then did we know the date and the time that the bridegroom would come for her. 2 Corinthians 5 verse 8 tells us to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. She is no longer suffering. She has no sickness. She's not in any pain. No moral limitations. And as painful as death is for all of us who are left behind, if you are a believer, it's their homecoming. It's their homecoming. And yet there is still another homecoming still to come, the resurrection, the rapture. The day when we all receive our glorified bodies and we are caught up together with our bridegroom, Jesus, again. But we don't know the day or the time. Only the Father knows. Last week I spoke about the ancient Jewish wedding ceremony. When the bridegroom left to prepare a place for the bride, she did not know when he would return. She simply had to be ready. Ginger was ready for her bridegroom. Of course, what I've been sharing with you has been my side of the story, which is full of heartbreak and regret. But what would be Ginger's side of the story? She had suffered for years. She was so sick that she was unable to do the things that she loved. She loved spending time with her church family. Saturday nights and Sunday mornings. She loved going to a good shopping center on Wednesdays, reaching out to those who were hurting, reaching out to those who needed a little bit of hope, reaching out to those who needed a prayer. So Ginger was ready to go home, to be with the Lord. She was ready. She was ready to lose the sickness and the pain and the limitations and the suffering. She was ready. She was ready to be with Jesus. She was ready no matter what the time, no matter what the hour, no matter what the day. And one day, every one of us will have our appointed day and time. Will you be ready? Noah was told it was going to rain. He didn't know the date or the time. He didn't even know what rain was. It had never rained before. And he worked on an ark for 100 years. He waited for 100 years, waiting for it to rain before it ever rained. Joseph, he didn't know the date that his dreams would all come to pass. Jonah was called to go to Nineveh, but he refused to go. He tried to run away, but God had ordained a date and a time for Jonah to go to Nineveh so that they would repent of their evil ways. Do you think that Jonah saw a big fish coming into his life? I don't think so. Do you think that once he was swallowed by this fish that he thought there would be a date, a time, that he would be spit up upon the beach in Nineveh so that he could complete the mission that God had called him to complete? Only God knows the date and the time of the events that occur in our lives. Jesus is coming soon, but we don't know the day or the time. Jesus repeatedly warned us to stay awake, to stay ready, and to remain faithful. Matthew 24:36 says, "No one knows the day or the hour when these things will happen. Only the Father knows." Luke 12:40 says, "You must be ready all the time." Mark 13:32-33 says, "No one knows the day or the hour when these things will happen. Not even the angels in heaven or the Son himself. Only the Father knows." And since you don't know either, You don't know when the time will come. So you've got to be on your guard. You've got to stay alert. And you've got to be expecting. 1 Thessalonians 5:2 says, the day of the Lord will come unexpectedly, like a thief in the night. We serve a God of love. So I urge you to cherish the people that God has placed in your life. Cherish the time that God has given you to be with them who love you. Tell them that you love them. Forgive quickly. Spend your time wisely. Seek God while you still have time. Because none of us know the date or the time that we will no longer be able to do any of these things. I know that God has called me into ministry when I was 13 years old. Now, I admit that I got off the beaten track and had to come back on later on, but I just did not know the date and the time. I did not know the date and the time of his return. So every morning when I wake up right now and I'm breathing, I just know that it's another day, it's another opportunity that I can serve him now. So do not waste your days. Spend your life loving God. Spend your life loving other people. And the choices that we make here, they matter throughout all of eternity. They matter for your eternity. And one day we will all stand before the Lord and we will have to give an account of our time and what we did with it. But until that day comes, I pray that we all embrace life and that we are ready. We are ready. We are ready for his return. We are ready for eternity. We are ready for Jesus. Because our bridegroom is coming soon.